Have you ever felt the urge to tell your children everything you keep buried inside, as if doing so would lift a weight off your shoulders? The truth is, not every truth strengthens. Some wound, some burden, and many leave scars that not even the greatest love can erase. Words born from honesty can still become chains for the very ones you love most. And if what you want is to protect their hearts, some confessions must remain yours alone, like stones you learn to carry with dignity. Picture for a moment that every phrase you speak is a seed falling into your children's souls. Some bloom into trust, others into respect, but there are seeds that grow into fear, into resentment, into burdens they were never meant to bear. What you keep unspoken, more often than not, isn't cowardice. It's timeless wisdom. It's choosing what deserves to be shared and what must be guarded in the silence that holds you up. Hello, my name is Gabriel, and I've worked with hundreds of people across the world, helping them build lives filled with Stoic wisdom, virtue, and courage. Today, I want to walk you through 11 truths you should never tell your children, even if they ask. Not because you need to hide, but because in protecting their innocence, you also protect your own dignity. And I want you to stay with me until the end. Because the last of these truths is the most delicate of all, admitting that you no longer have hope. That is the most devastating blow you could ever give them, and understanding why you must never do it could forever change the way you relate to them. On the first point, I want to pause on something that may seem harmless, but leaves invisible wounds. Never turn your pain into a constant topic of conversation. You might think that talking about your physical ailments, your diagnoses, or every new discomfort in your body is a way of sharing your life with them. But what feels like a need for companionship inside you, in their ears, becomes a weight they don't know how to carry. It's not that they don't love you, it's that they don't have the emotional tools to bear your pain without feeling guilty or helpless. Think about it for a moment. When you list the medications you take, the sleepless nights, or the exhaustion that keeps repeating, what are you really expecting from them? You're seeking empathy, attention, the reassurance that someone stays by your side in the midst of fragility. But what usually shows up instead is discomfort, avoidance, a change of subject, and that doesn't mean they don't care about your well-being. It means they don't know how to become the refuge your soul longs for. In the end, you end up feeling ignored, and they carry the guilt of not being able to give you what you asked for. In Stoic philosophy, Marcus Aurelius reminded us that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Talking endlessly about what hurts doesn't make it lighter. On the contrary, it turns it into identity. If every encounter with your children is colored by your ailments, what gets reinforced isn't love, but the idea that you define yourself by your limitations. And without meaning to, they start to see you less as the wise person you still are, and more as a failing body. Your dignity deserves more than being reduced to a list of symptoms. Now imagine choosing selective silence instead. That rather than repeating every ache, you hold it with inner strength and share it only with those who can truly help you carry it. A doctor, a therapist, a friend who understands you on equal ground. Your children don't need to witness every thorn. They need to feel that despite everything, you're still a tree standing firm, with deep roots and branches that continue to give shade. This isn't about denying your pain or pretending everything is fine. It's about not making it the center of your relationship with them. Because when you keep silent with dignity, what you offer isn't an empty silence, but a space for them to see you strong, to remember you as someone who knew how to stand even in fragility. And that image, believe me, will be far more valuable to them than any story of ailments. The real lesson isn't in what you say, but in how you choose to live it. On this second point I want to share with you, it touches on a truth that's painful to admit. Don't reveal your private battles of love or loneliness to your children. So often, in search of relief, We fall into the temptation of talking to our children about what happened in their parents' relationship, the betrayal, the indifference, the sadness that came when companionship turned into absence. But they are not judges, nor are they counselors. They are children. And by exposing them to those battles, you burden them with guilt and questions that do not belong to them. Imagine for a moment a child hearing that their mother felt abandoned or that their father suffered betrayal. What feels like catharsis for you can become an identity wound for them. Because when you speak of those intimacies, you are not only sharing your pain, you are touching the very root of who they are. And even if they are adults, that knowledge lingers like a shadow that's hard to shake off. Suddenly, they feel responsible for caring for you, for consoling you, even for taking sides in battles that should no longer be revived. The Stoics spoke of the importance of keeping the soul in order. Epictetus taught that not everything we think needs to be spoken, and that temperance is an act of wisdom. Keeping silent about certain wounds is not denying what you lived, it is protecting what is sacred. The intimacy of a couple belongs only to those who lived it, not to the children. And by keeping quiet, you're not hiding the truth, you're preserving their innocence and your own dignity. Think about it from another angle. When you tell them about your loneliness, when you confess that the nights feel endless, what you're really giving them is a weight they cannot lighten. They might offer company out of obligation, they might feel pity, but what they will never be able to do is fill the emptiness that only you can reconcile within yourself. That task isn't theirs, it's yours. And by not understanding that, you end up stealing their peace in the name of your relief. True strength does not lie in exposing every wound before your children, but in showing them that you've learned to live with them. That despite the pain, you chose to rise again. That even when loneliness strikes, you know how to turn it into a space of peace. When you keep those intimate battles to yourself, you are not denying your story. You are teaching them, by example, that there are wounds to be carried with courage. And that legacy, far more than any bitter confession, will be what they treasure. Because what they need from you are not heartbreaking confessions, but a beacon that reminds them that even in the middle of the storm, calm can be preserved. We've reached the third point in this talk, and here the warning is clear. Keep quiet about the deep disappointments that left you scarred. We've all felt at some point the weight of betrayal, abandonment, or broken promises. And while the temptation to share it with your children may be strong, in the hope that they'll understand how much you suffered, the truth is that speaking it doesn't release your pain, it transfers it. And that burden, far from bringing them closer, can push them away, because you place them in a role they were never meant to fill, carrying your emotional wounds. Think of how many times you wanted to say, "The ones I loved most let me down," or "They failed me when I needed them most." Maybe you've even said it once and felt the discomfort in the air. Your children don't know how to respond to that truth. They aren't responsible for what happened in the past, nor are they in a position to repair what others did wrong. And yet, by hearing it, they feel a silent pressure to compensate, to fill voids that don't belong to them. That's an emotional injustice handed down unintentionally. The Stoics warned us about this mistake. Seneca said that pain grows larger when it becomes a constant story, and that silence, in many cases, is an act of self-protection. Retelling a disappointment over and over doesn't change what happened, it only keeps the wound alive. And when you share that wound with those you love, you make them involuntary accomplices in a suffering that isn't theirs. What feels like honesty turns into a chain that ties them to your past. Now imagine that instead of speaking about what failed you, you choose to write it in a letter you never send. There, you put down the names, the facts, the emotions, and then you either keep it or burn it. That intimate act doesn't erase the wound, but it transforms it into controlled memory instead of destructive conversation. This way, you protect your children from reliving with you what has already passed while giving your heart a dignified outlet. Silence in this case isn't complicity with the harm or repression of the pain. It's choosing where to lay your truth. And your children are not the soil for planting disappointments, they are the ground where resilience should grow, not fragments of bitterness. By keeping those scars unspoken, you teach them that dignity isn't about telling what was done to you, but about showing who you decided to become after it happened. And that lesson, even without words, will be the most powerful message they'll ever receive. If what you've heard so far has stirred something inside you, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel, to give a like if these words resonate with you, and to tell me from which country you're listening. And if you want to leave a clear sign that you're awake to these teachings, write in the comments the phrase, "My silence is my strength." Because what you choose to withhold with wisdom also builds your power. Now we come to the fourth point, and this one touches on one of the most dangerous confessions you could ever share. Don't talk to your children about your fear of time passing or of death. At some point, all of us feel that shiver when we see our bodies change, when memory starts to slip away, or when we think about the inevitable end. But if you put that into words in front of them, you don't release your anxiety. You plant a double fear, yours and theirs. Children are not prepared to carry the image of a father or mother defeated by fear because it shakes the very foundation of security they grew up with. Think about it for a moment. What happens when a child hears, "I'm afraid of getting old," or "I don't have much time left"? More than compassion, what awakens in them is unease, a sense that time is running out and that sooner or later they'll be left alone. That thought lingers with them even if they never say it, and what you intended as an outlet turns into a silent ghost that follows them through their days. They end up worrying about you more than necessary or avoiding visiting you so they won't have to face that painful conversation. Marcus Aurelius in his old age wrote, "No one dies before their time and no one lives beyond it." For the Stoics, speaking constantly about fear of the end was giving it more power than it deserves. Courage lies in living what comes with serenity, without feeding that monster with unnecessary words. And if you think about it, what are you teaching when you confess that fear? You're teaching fragility, insecurity, hopelessness. But when you choose silence, you teach strength, acceptance, and trust. In this case, silence becomes the purest way of passing on confidence. Instead of speaking about death with anxiety, you can teach your children, by example, what it means to live with purpose until the very last day. You don't need to say, "I'm terrified of growing old." It's enough to show them that you still get up each day wanting to care for your body, to keep your mind alive, to be grateful for what you still have. That image leaves a far more powerful imprint than any confession of fear. Your children don't need to hear about your fear. They need to see your courage. Imagine the contrast. A mother who says, "I'm afraid of being alone in old age," leaves her children with a weight of sadness and obligation. But a mother who keeps that fear to herself and instead dedicates her days to learning, to walking, to enjoying a simple daily ritual conveys something else: hope. Not the false hope of stopping time, but the real hope of living with dignity whatever comes. Remember this: fear multiplies when it's shared, but serenity does too. Don't hand your children the weight of your shadows. Give them the light of your example. Because what they need most from you are not words of despair, but the certainty that even in life's twilight, you can still keep shining. We've now reached the fifth point, and here it's essential to understand this. Never confess your financial mistakes or failed decisions to your children. Inside, you may feel the need to justify why you don't have more assets, why you couldn't save enough, or why certain choices in the past left you with present limitations. But when you say it out loud in front of them, what you hand over isn't wisdom. It's a weight of guilt and reproach that doesn't help them at all, and in many cases can turn into silent resentment. Think about the impact of phrases like, "If I hadn't sold that house, I'd be secure today," or "If I had invested better, I wouldn't have to depend on anyone." To your ears, they sound like confessions of weariness, but to theirs, they can sound like veiled accusations that they'll have to carry you, or like a message of failure that clouds the way they see you. Children, even as adults, should never bear the weight of the emotional debts left behind by your financial story. Your worth is not measured by what you accumulated, but by the life you built with what you had. The Stoics understood that wealth doesn't guarantee dignity. Seneca wrote it clearly. The poor man is not the one who has little, but the one who craves more. When you share your financial mistakes with your children, you're not teaching them, you're pulling them into a place of worry that doesn't belong to them. Worse still, in some cases, you plant the seed of judgment. Why didn't my parents do more? Why didn't they plan ahead? And what could have been wise silence turns instead into a crack in the relationship. Now picture a different scene. Instead of telling them what you lost, you choose to show them what you've learned. You keep quiet about your setbacks and, through example, teach frugality, simplicity, adaptability. You don't need to say, "I messed up with money," for them to learn prudence. It's enough that they see you spending consciously, valuing what you have, and not living enslaved by what's missing. That's a legacy far stronger than any story of mistakes. Mishandled money can leave scars, but it doesn't have to define you, nor should it define your relationship with your children. What they need to sense in you is serenity, not guilt. They need to see that even with limitations, you are still the master of your life. Because the true legacy is not bank accounts or material inheritances, it's the quiet teaching that dignity doesn't depend on numbers, but on the way you choose to live with what you have. Remember this: every word you share about your financial failures can become unnecessary weight for them. Choose to keep those truths unspoken, not out of shame, but out of wisdom. Because what teaches most is not the confession of error, but the way you rebuild yourself after the fall. And that lesson, silent but powerful, will be the true treasure you leave in their memory. We've come to the sixth point, and here lies a truth many overlook. Don't pass on your resentments toward other family members to your children. You may have carried for years the wound of a brother who betrayed you, a cousin who took advantage of you, or even the indifference of your own parents. But when you turn those stories into confidences for your children, you don't close the cycle, you prolong it, creating a chain of grudges that ends up being inherited without purpose. Think about what happens when you say, "Your uncle never helped me," "Your grandmother was unfair to me," or "No one in this family ever recognized me." What feels like release for you turns into an inner fracture for them. They feel forced to choose sides, burdened with a divided loyalty that poisons relationships. They may smile politely as they listen, but inside, those words place them in the middle of a war that isn't theirs. And so, what you sought as companionship becomes an inheritance of resentment. The Stoics spoke about the importance of not feeding disordered passions, and resentment is among the most corrosive. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to resemble your enemy." By sharing your resentments with your children, you resemble what you criticize. You perpetuate the offense instead of rising above it. And in that act, without realizing it, you teach them that life is measured by unfinished accounts, when in truth, it should be measured by the freedom of not being tied to the past. Now imagine choosing another path. Instead of sharing your old family wounds, you decide to speak about the importance of forgiveness, about the peace that comes from letting go of what was never resolved. You don't need to invent reconciliations or deny what happened. It's enough to keep quiet about what no longer serves. In doing so, you teach them by example that not everything needs to be passed down, that some burdens end with you so they don't scar the next generation. Your children don't need to be the keepers of your grudges or heirs to your past battles. They need to see you free, even from those who failed you. Because when you silence resentment, what you offer isn't empty silence, but a model of strength. You show them that dignity isn't built on clinging to injustice, but on the conscious choice not to let bitterness rule the present. Remember this: every resentment you share is a poisoned legacy, and the last thing you want is for your children to carry wounds that were never theirs. Keep to yourself what hurts and give them instead what liberates. That is the inheritance worth leaving, an example of strength that chooses not to multiply pain, but to stop it with your own hands. Seventh, a quiet mistake many make without even realizing it: don't unload your daily exhaustion or frustration onto your children. We all have days when routine feels heavy, when the body slows down, when memories seem brighter than opportunities. But if every conversation with them turns into a list of complaints, what you're passing on isn't closeness, but weariness they don't know how to ease. Instead of feeling accompanied, you risk pushing them away so they won't have to hear the same things over and over. Think about it. When you say phrases like, "I don't feel like doing anything anymore," "I'm tired of everything," or "life has no meaning," what feels like release to you sounds like surrender to them. And that echo stays etched in their memory, the image of a father or mother who, instead of inspiring, declared defeat. Your children don't need to become repositories of your frustrations. They need to know that even on your heaviest days, you still have the will to stand. The Stoics warned against constant complaining. Epictetus said, "It is not things that harm us, but our opinion of them." And when that opinion turns into repeated complaint, it not only poisons you, it poisons those who listen. Turning exhaustion into a daily speech trains your mind to live in defeat and trains your children to see you as someone who let themselves be dragged down by the weight of time. Now imagine another scene. Instead of calling your child to tell them how hard your day was, you choose to share something small that brought you joy. A flower blooming on your balcony, a sweet memory that resurfaced, a simple gesture that gave you energy again. It's not about denying fatigue, it's about not making it the main character. When you share even a small light, they feel relief, they feel pride, they feel that life and wisdom still flow through you. Tiredness is real, no one denies it, but turning it into daily conversation is planting shadows where there should be clarity. Dignity isn't about hiding that it hurts, it's about not making it the axis of your relationship with those you love. Your children won't remember how many times you said you were exhausted. They'll remember whether, despite the exhaustion, you still knew how to smile, how to give thanks, how to teach that even in fatigue, there is room for strength. Remember this: every complaint shared weighs double, but every act of gratitude shared multiplies hope. Don't turn your children into spectators of your frustration. Give them instead the image of someone who, even at life's twilight, still knew how to stand tall. Because that is the true inheritance, not your words of exhaustion, but your silence filled with courage. We've reached the 8th point, and here one of the most common traps in the relationship with children comes to light. Keep quiet about comparisons with their success or their life choices. Sometimes, almost without realizing it, phrases slip out like, "At your age, I had already done more," "I never had the opportunities you have," or "If I had studied what you did, my life would be different." These words aren't just casual remarks. They're invisible darts that pierce with guilt, resentment, and distance the very ones you love most. Imagine the weight a child feels when, with every accomplishment, instead of receiving pride, they receive comparison. What should be a reason for celebration becomes an emotional debt. And worse still, by mentioning what you did or didn't do, you place your story as the measure of theirs, when in reality each life has its own pace, its own paths, its own trials. Your comparisons don't inspire them, they drown them in a judgment they never asked for. The Stoics taught us not to envy what others possess, but to focus on what is within our control. Seneca said, "Envy is voluntary suffering," and that is exactly what you transmit when you let those comparisons escape. Envy disguised as longing, reproach hidden under the mask of nostalgia. But instead of bringing you closer, that gesture plants an invisible barrier your children clearly perceive, even if they never say it. Now picture another way. Instead of comparing, you choose to listen. When your child speaks to you about their project or their life decision, you keep silent about what you were doing at their age and choose instead to celebrate what they are building. That silence is not empty, it's respect. It's giving them permission to live their life without the weight of your frustrated expectations. In doing so, you give them what they need most: the certainty that you accept them as they are, without competition, without unfinished debts. Your children are not in this world to complete your dreams or to correct your paths. They are here to chart their own, and what they will value most in you won't be your comparisons, but your ability to support them with dignity, to look at them without hidden reproach. Because the greatness of a father or a mother is not measured by how much they achieved, but by how much they knew how to inspire without placing chains. We've reached the 9th point, and here we touch on a silent poison many parents pass on without realizing it. Don't speak to your children about your sacrifices as if they were an unpaid debt. Phrases like, "I gave everything for you," "I sacrificed so you could have what I never had," or "I gave up my dreams so you could live yours," may sound like reminders of love, but deep down, they become an emotional burden that traps them. Those words don't inspire true gratitude. They plant guilt and resentment. Think about it carefully. Your children didn't ask to be born, they didn't choose for you to give certain things up, and they weren't in charge of your past decisions. When you turn those sacrifices into an argument, you make them debtors of a bill they can never repay. They then live with the weight that any mistake, any failure, or even any distance from you will be seen as betrayal of your effort. And that invisible wound slowly breaks the relationship until it becomes an emotional transaction. The Stoics understood this differently. Epictetus said, "Freedom is found when we no longer depend on what others owe us." And this applies to family bonds as well. To love your children through the logic of debt isn't love, it's control in disguise. Because true sacrifice, the kind born of the heart, is never collected. If you chose to give, giving was your act of greatness. But if you bring it up every day like a bill, it stops being generosity and becomes reproach. Now picture another scene. Instead of repeating what you gave up, you choose to highlight what you gained. You speak with pride about how those years of effort made you stronger, more patient, wiser. And you keep quiet about the bitter part, the part that could turn into resentment. Your children don't need to know how much you renounced. They need to feel that, thanks to that path, you still stand as an example of resilience. That silent lesson will always be more powerful than any sermon about sacrifice. Remember this: true love is not a debt to be collected. It's an inheritance to be passed on. If you choose to keep silent about sacrifices and instead speak from gratitude, your children will grow up with respect, not guilt. Because the dignity of your life doesn't lie in what you gave up, but in how you chose to love without conditions. Hold the weight of those efforts within yourself and give them instead the freedom to love you without feeling indebted. That will be the lesson that stays in their hearts long after you're gone. At the 10th point, we enter sensitive ground. Don't share with your children the secrets of your childhood or the deep wounds left by your own parents. You may carry memories of hardship, violence, injustice, or silences that marked you from an early age. And while it may seem like an act of trust to speak about them, what you're really doing is transferring a pain that isn't theirs. You hand them images they can't erase, and instead of drawing them closer, you may fill them with sadness, anger, or confusion toward people who are no longer here to answer for themselves. Think about what happens when a child hears, "Your grandfather was cruel to me," "Your grandmother never showed me affection," or "I grew up in a home where there was no room for tenderness." What feels like a liberating truth for you becomes a blow to their own roots, because those grandparents, those ancestors, are part of their identity, carrying a dark image of people who should represent love and legacy leaves them trapped in a painful contradiction they never asked for. The Stoics knew that memory can be a double-edged sword. Epictetus wrote that we must not cling to what is no longer under our control, and nothing is more out of your control than the wounds of your childhood. By laying them before your children, you don't heal. You only prolong an echo that should have ended with you. True healing lies in making peace with that past in silence, not in spreading it as a poisoned inheritance. Now imagine another way. Instead of recounting the shadows of your childhood, you choose to speak of what you learned. You don't say, "I was denied affection," but rather, "Today I value tenderness because I know what it means to grow up without it." You don't say, "I was humiliated," but instead, "I understand the importance of respect because I once lived without it." That shift changes everything. You don't burden your children with the wounds, you inspire them with the wisdom born from them. They don't need to know about the blows, they need to know about the strength they forged in you. Your childhood may have been filled with thorns, but you don't have to pass those thorns down as a legacy. What your children deserve are the flowers that bloomed in spite of them, not the wounds that still bleed. When you keep those dark secrets to yourself and choose instead to pass on only the lessons, you give them the most valuable gift of all, the certainty that life can transform pain into strength, and that teaching will always be more powerful than any bitter confession. Because what is kept in silence with dignity becomes an eternal example. We've reached the 11th and final point, and here comes the hardest warning of all. Never tell your children that you've lost hope or purpose. In your darkest moments, you may feel the temptation to say, "There's nothing left for me to live. My life is already over," or "I'm just waiting for time to pass." But those words, though they may feel like simple release to you, are like knives that pierce the hearts of the ones who love you most. There is no deeper wound for a child than hearing from their mother or father that life has lost its meaning. Picture the scene. They look to you for counsel, for support, for direction, and what they receive is the confession that you've given up. What should have been a refugee turns into a shadow, and what should have been guidance becomes emptiness. Your words remain etched like a sentence, because a child never forgets when a parent admits they no longer believe in the future. It's not just a comment. It's a legacy of despair that clings to their own view of life. Marcus Aurelius, in the midst of wars and loss, wrote, "As long as you breathe, you still hold in your hands the ability to act with virtue." For the Stoics, losing hope was the worst defeat because it didn't come from the outside. It was born within. And if they, facing tragedy and uncertain fates, never let despair become their language, how could you hand it over so easily to your children? Keeping silent here isn't deceit. It is an act of love and protection. What your children need to hear is not that you're tired of living, but that despite the weariness, you still choose to rise. that even though time has changed your strength, you still find meaning in small things, in a slow walk, in a sunrise, in a brief conversation. That example doesn't require speeches, it requires resolve. And by keeping despair unspoken, you let them see in you something greater than your fears, the ability to remain a beacon, even in the shadows. Remember this: words that plant life multiply strength, words that plant defeat multiply emptiness. Never hand your children the confession that you've surrendered, because that is handing them a wound they cannot heal. Choose instead to keep that silence and give them the image of someone who, even in the final stretch, continues to walk with dignity. That will be your greatest legacy, not the confession of your despair, but the silent teaching that there is always a reason to keep going. We've reached the end of this journey, and if you're still here, it's because you understand that some truths are not meant to be spoken, no matter how much they burn inside. This isn't about hiding who you are or denying your story. It's about recognizing that not everything should be handed over to your children. Some confessions, even when they seem sincere, only plant weight, guilt, or sadness in the very ones who should never have to carry it. True wisdom lies in choosing what to keep silent and what to reveal, because silence too can be an act of love. Think about everything we've covered: pain, disappointments, resentments, comparisons, fears, and sacrifices. Each of these, if turned into constant speech, can open cracks in your relationship with your children. But if you hold them with strength, if you choose to remain silent with dignity, what you leave behind is not emptiness, but example. The example of someone who knew how to preserve their strength, who passed on lessons without passing on wounds, who chose to protect the hearts of those they love most. Stoicism reminds us that while we cannot always control what we feel, we can control what we do with it. And that is your greatest tool, to decide which words deserve to be spoken and which should remain in the shelter of your silence. Because your legacy is not the scars you share, it is the strength you inspire. Your children don't need to hear your fears, they need to see your courage. They don't need to inherit your battles, they need to inherit your resilience. I'm Gabriel, and if this video resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe and join this community where we choose to awaken. I'd love to know which country you're listening from, and to see you leave in the comments the phrase that defines us: my silence is my strength. Because here, we're not talking about staying quiet out of fear, but staying quiet out of greatness. And remember this: the path doesn't end here. In the next videos, we'll continue uncovering those uncomfortable truths that, far from destroying you, can give you back your dignity. Stay close, because the strength of your life still lies in what you choose to keep silent and in how you choose to live fully.